Good morning. The Subcommittee on Coast Guard, Maritime, and Fisheries will now come to order. This subcommittee is meeting today for our inaugural hearing of the newly created Subcommittee on the Coast Guard, Maritime, and Fisheries. I'm honored to be chairing this subcommittee and excited to be serving with my ranking member colleague, Senator Blunt Rochester, as the ranking member of this important subcommittee. I look forward to working with Senator Blunt Rochester and her team and all the members of this subcommittee in the 119th Congress. Today's hearing will focus on international conflict, criminal activity, and yes, even slave labor associated with the ocean. We're particularly focused on the fight for fisheries resources, geopolitical flashpoints, where conflict is likely to arise, and the role of both state and non-state actors involved in conflict with criminal activity in the fishing sector. And of course, we want sustainable, lasting fisheries. Additionally, we'll discuss measures being taken to address the growing challenges and criminal activity surrounding these resources and conflicts and what more can be done. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, also known as IUU fishing, poses a significant threat to global marine ecosystems, economies, sustainable fisheries, and food security. It is estimated that IUU fishing accounts for up to 20% of the global catch, which translates to global losses between 10 billion and 50 billion annually for fishing fleets that actually fish legally, like ours in America. The scale of IUU fishing varies by region, with some areas experiencing more severe impacts due to lax enforcement, corruption, and high demand for seafood. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party in China plays a significant role in this problem in the global fishing industry and is the worst offender of IUU fishing by far, no surprise. The Chinese government has provided billions of dollars in subsidies to its distant water fishing fleets, gray fleets as we sometimes call them, enabling their fishing sector to grow exponentially. According to Global Fishing Watch, China operates approximately 57,000 fishing vessels. 57,000, which accounts for 44% of the world's total fishing activity. Operating in tandem with the Chinese military to protect its fishing fleet, the Chinese fishing boats benefit from the protection of the Chinese Coast Guard and Navy, ensuring their ability to pilfer resources around the globe. And if you care about environment and healthy ecosystems, this should be a top concern of yours. China ravaging our oceans. The scale of China's fishing activities raises concerns about the sustainability of global fish stocks around the world and the geopolitical tensions that can arise from maritime disputes. China is a concern, but Russia is as well. Close to Alaska, Russian and other vessels conduct IUU fishing near our exclusive economic zone, our EEZ. And although Russia banned imports of U.S. seafood into Russia over 10 years ago, Russia has been able to bring their seafood into the U.S., sometimes using loopholes through China, as recently as the late 2023. IUU fishing is not an issue just for the United States. U.S. fisheries are the most sustainable fisheries in the world. But sustainably sourced, legally caught, high-quality seafood can't compete with illegally sourced seafood that is being plundered from our oceans. And I might add, due to some great reporting, and I'm going to reference it here in this hearing from Politico magazine, The New Yorker, China also uses slave labor on many of its fishing vessels. Pretty hard to compete against slave labor if you're an American fisherman. IUU fishing not only distorts the true cost of seafood sold in markets, but it is often linked overseas with transnational crime, forced and slave labor, and even human and drug trafficking. So the key to preventing IUU fishing is to lead international efforts to address the issues at its sources globally. And through the years, Congress and the executive branch, Democrat and Republicans, have worked together with global partners and have focused on IUU fishing. I'm proud to see my colleague and friend, Senator Whitehouse, here. He and I recently introduced our Fighting Foreign Illegal Seafood Harvests, also known as the FISH Act, a bipartisan bill that just recently in this committee passed unanimously. It puts IUU fishing vessels on a blacklist, raises costs for IUU vessel owners and importers, and supports increased Coast Guard enforcement and work with our partners. It builds on previous bipartisan legislation that this committee has championed, particularly Senator Wicker's Maritime SAFE Act. In April, President Trump signed an executive order entitled Restoring American Seafood Competitiveness. My office and my team and I were proud to work closely with the Trump administration on this important executive order. This order aims at strengthening measures to combat IUU fishing, including preventing IUU seafood from entering the U.S. market and supporting international efforts to address the issue at its source. We look forward to working with the administration on these efforts. But it's not all bad news. This is, after all, the subcommittee in charge of the Coast Guard. And I believe we are going to be embarking on a golden age for our Coast Guard. In the budget reconciliation bill, right now there is $22 billion focused on the Coast Guard of the United States. That will likely be the biggest investment in the Coast Guard in the history of the United States of America. So there is a lot of good things happening with regard to our Coast Guard. The U.S. has a vital role to play, a leading role to play in combating IUU fishing through regulatory measures, international cooperation, consumer awareness, and passing the FISH Act. By preventing IUU seafood from entering our market, the U.S. can help protect legitimate fishermen, some of whom we'll hear from today, and promote sustainable fishing practices worldwide. With that, I want to thank all of our four witnesses for being here today. And I am going to recognize my ranking member, but I see the chairman of the Commerce Committee has arrived. And perhaps, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to say a few words.
I'll defer to the ranking member.
Okay. Now over to my colleague, Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Chairman Sullivan. I am looking forward to serving with you on this very important committee, subcommittee, and I'm also glad that you're holding this very important hearing and for the chairman's dedication to these issues, particularly through the introduction of the FISH Act, along with Senator Whitehouse, who joins us today. This bill reflects the seriousness and the urgency of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And I look forward to working with you as we move this bill forward. I also want to thank our witnesses for being here today and sharing their expertise and for the critical work that you do each and every day to protect our oceans and our economy. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is a serious and growing global threat. Not only does it harm American fishermen and coastal communities, which Delaware actually is a coastal community and has many coastal communities, but it destabilizes marine ecosystems and even has national security implications. In my home state, the mislabeling of Chesapeake blue crab undermines the livelihoods of thousands of Delawareans. It's reported in a 2015 study. In an investigation, they found that fraudulent labeling of domestic crab occurred in about 48% of mid-Atlantic crab cakes. The good news is we have experts at NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service that collect data on this industry to enable enforcement of science-backed regulations. Unfortunately, the administration has fired about 18% of NOAA's fisheries staff and is looking to cut the budget by 30%. To make matters worse, cuts to the rest of the agency are undermining this work even further. NOAA Fisheries relies on the NOAA fleet to conduct stock assessments and surveys, a fleet that requires skilled, credentialed civilian mariners to operate. And due to the ongoing hiring freeze, 30% of NOAA's research ships will not leave the dock this summer. Fewer research ships in the water will result in fewer assessments and surveys, opening the door for illegally caught and fraudulently labeled products to flood the market, which would undercut our own domestic seafood industry and threaten consumer safety. Illegal fishing is also increasingly connected to criminal activity like forced labor, human trafficking, and organized smuggling operations. Forced labor is rampant in China's seafood industry and processing plants, where many reports detail how Uyghurs are forcibly moved and made to work in unsafe conditions to satisfy market needs. These violations underscore the need for more transparency with the seafood supply chain. Protecting American consumers and business, that is the goal. But we can't achieve that goal without the expertise, enforcement, and data from NOAA Fisheries. Now I'd like to pivot to the role of the U.S. Coast Guard and what it plays in our country. I too am really proud to be on this subcommittee as a ranking member and to work with our incredible Coast Guard. Their presence deters bad actors and signals to the world that the United States takes illegal fishing seriously. Unfortunately, the administration has shifted limited Coast Guard resources away from the coastal communities who need them most. And I'm especially concerned about the redirection of the Coast Guard aircraft and ships away from core mission priorities, like fisheries enforcement and search and rescue, to be used for alien expulsion flights on behalf of ICE. This is not their mission, and we should be working together to ensure the Coast Guard maintains access to the resources they need to do their jobs. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is an environmental issue, an economic issue, a national security issue, and a moral issue. And it's time for us to invest in the policies, agencies, and personnel NOAA and the Coast Guard need to protect American fishermen and the consumers that rely on access to quality, ethically sourced seafood. I look forward to today's discussion and to continuing the incredible bipartisan work of this subcommittee and this committee and our work to address this global challenge. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Blunt-Rochester. I'm honored that the chairman of the Commerce Committee, Senator Cruz, my good friend, is also here. So, Mr. Chairman, some remarks from you would be very welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Chairman Sullivan for holding this hearing to discuss an ongoing threat to America's economic and maritime security, which is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. This problem is global, but its effects are being felt right here at home, especially in my home state of Texas. For years, Mexican fishermen have brazenly crossed into U.S. waters off the Texas coast to poach red snapper in the Gulf of America. Some of these illegal boats have hauled in thousands of pounds of red snapper at a time, stripping our waters of one of the Gulf's most iconic and economically valuable fish. They set long lines and nets, hauling out tons of snapper, only to export many of those fish back to the United States. These actions are illegal and flat-out theft. This isn't just about fish. Some of the very same vessels crossing into U.S. waters to steal red snapper also support Mexican cartels involved in smuggling drugs and smuggling people. These poachers are robbing from hardworking Texas fishermen who play by the rules and rely on fishing to support their families and their communities. The U.S. Coast Guard, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and NOAA are all grappling with this complex issue, trying to maintain the integrity of our waters. Last year, the Coast Guard seized more than 18 tons of illegally caught fish from Mexican lanchas, a dramatic increase from just under 3.5 tons in 2017. And already this year, the Coast Guard has arrested more than 50 Mexican fishermen and seized thousands of pounds of illegally caught fish, further underscoring the need for additional measures to protect our resources. Earlier this year, this committee advanced the bipartisan Illegal Red Snapper and Tuna Enforcement Act, which I introduced along with Senator Schatz of Hawaii, to give NOAA and law enforcement the tools they need to identify fish stolen from our waters. I also continue to support better tools and increased resources for the Coast Guard, including maritime surveillance platforms at South Padre Island, which I helped authorize, to strengthen our ability to monitor and stop illegal fishing and smuggling along our southern maritime border. Globally, we must also confront the threat posed by China's use of its fishing fleet as part of a maritime militia. Many of these Chinese vessels exploit crews through forced labor, unsafe conditions, and wage theft. Crew members are held against their will, denied basic human rights, and even subjected to physical violence. This is not competition. It is barbaric economic warfare. Let me be clear. Our waters are not open to poachers. Texas and U.S. fishermen deserve a free and fair market for their seafood. And Americans deserve to know the seafood on their dinner plate wasn't caught by criminal actors or Mexican cartels violating U.S. law. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses on how we can strengthen our enforcement, close legal loopholes, and restore order and accountability to our offshore waters. Together, we must ensure that American fisheries and American sovereignty are defended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is a sign of a hearing that's already producing results. I was very unaware of the challenges with Mexican IUU fishing, and that's something that we will focus on in the subcommittee as well. Now it is my goal to introduce our witnesses for today, and I want to begin with recognizing Senator Whitehouse for his opening remarks on the good bipartisan work that we've all been doing on IUU fishing.
Thanks, Chairman. It's good to be here with you. It's good to work with you on the Fish Act. Congratulations on getting it successfully through the Commerce Committee, and I hope we can find a good vehicle like the NDAA to get it passed into law quickly. You very properly used the word plunder about what is happening with the illegal fishing fleet. You can kind of divide the illegal fishing behavior in the high seas into two general categories. One is the pirate fishing fleet, which is just renegades out there, very often using slave labor, very often not going into national waters, very often operating with very bad environmental conditions. And that fleet needs to be regulated, needs to be reined in, needs to be brought to heel. It is doing immense damage. The other is the Chinese fishing fleet, which is doing a lot more than fishing out there. We believe that they've been conducting, for instance, intelligence operations and things like that. Having these fleets out there contributes to other forms of smuggling, we believe, human smuggling, arms smuggling, drug smuggling. When you open up this vector of illegal behavior, then other lawbreakers will find it, and that's another reason for shutting it down. I think all of us here, whether from Texas or Alaska or Delaware or Rhode Island, have coasts, and it's important to our fishing communities to stand up to the effect that all of this pirate and Chinese predatory fishing has on our fishing markets and on the well-being of our fishing communities. It's also good to help protect our oceans. We have pelagic species that have been crashed 90% and more in their population, and illegal fishing is a big contributor to that. So for healthy oceans and healthy markets. This is also an important topic. And then Chairman Sullivan and I both spent a lot of time with our friend Senator McCain. We did a lot of traveling. And I was often the one who brought up the question of fishing as we traveled around. And in the Pacific, every place we went together that had a coast, when we brought up the question of illegal fishing, our local interlocutors lit up. It was a big issue for them, particularly with respect to the often violent behavior of the Chinese fishing fleet and the Chinese Navy vessels that support and defend that aggressive fishing fleet. When we were in Munich together, you'll remember, Senator Sullivan, we had a briefing from the AFRICOM commander, who without provocation by either of us said, oh, you know, one thing that would really help us would be to be able to support our allies under my command in Africa, in Africa, to make sure that they can identify that there is illegal fishing going on in their waters, identify whose illegal fishing is going on in their waters, and do what they can to try to defend against the illegal fishing going on in their waters. That woke up the Navy, because it was an Army general who was now starting to look at ocean stuff.
Actually, it was a Marine four-star.
It was a Marine, you're right, sorry. You're absolutely right. And so it was...
The chairman's liable to hold you in contempt, Senator Whitehouse.
I know. I know. You don't mess with a Marine ever. And very often, what was also brought up was China. So in terms of creating soft power opportunities with our allies, we have a great opportunity here to help them against the Chinese fishing fleet, which is deeply annoying to countries all around the world. So thank you for giving me the chance to be here with you, and I look forward to working with you to get the Fish Act passed into law, and that's it.
Great. Well, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your hard work on these and other issues. Our Save Our Seas Act bills have been helping clean up the oceans in America and around the world, and we're working closely now with President Trump and his team on those bills to implement them. So a lot of good things happening.
Forgive me if I have to get over to finance now. We're here at the Treasury Secretary.
No problem. Well, I want to thank you again, Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you also to the chairman of the committee and the ranking member.
I want to welcome our witnesses now. We have first Gregory Poling, who is a director and senior fellow for the Southeast Asia Program and Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative at CSIS. So thank you, Mr. Poling. Nathan Rickard, who is a partner at Picard, Kentz, and Rowe. And especially I want to welcome Gabriel Prout, who's a fellow Alaskan, president of the Alaska Bering Sea Crabbers Association, I believe a third-generation Alaskan out of Kodiak Island. So, Mr. Prout, we're very honored that you're here. I think you definitely win the award for traveling the furthest for this important hearing. And then finally, Dr. Saumweber, who is the director of the Stephenson Ocean Security Project, CSIS, and professor of marine studies at the University of Rhode Island. So a constituent of Senator Whitehouse. You will each have 5 minutes to deliver an oral statement, and a longer written statement will be included in the record if you so desire. So we'll start with Mr. Poling.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sullivan and Ranking Member Blunt Rochester. It's a real honor to testify today. Before I begin, I should note that my institution, CSIS, does not take policy positions, so my views are mine alone. I saved Dr. Saumweber the difficulty of having to say the same thing as a fellow CSISer. IUU fishing is not just an economic or a food security or an environmental issue. As we've already heard, this is a national security threat, one that over the last decade, the U.S. and partners and allies have woken up to. There is the direct cost that organized criminal networks and illicit networks that engage in IUU fishing also engage in other forms of illegality, what's often called fisheries crime, be that trafficking of drugs, weapons, people, forced labor and modern-day slavery, money laundering, tax evasion. They also indirectly contribute to piracy, as we've seen in the Gulf of Guinea or Somalia over the last 2 decades, and in some cases even to insurgency and terrorism, as was the case in the Sri Lankan Civil War in the 90s and 2000s. So vessels that engage in one type of illegal activity do not generally only engage in that one type of illegal activity. There's also the indirect threat IUU fishing undermines governance and opens states up to coercion. That's particularly true given the fact that China has the world's largest distant water fleet and engages in the most IUU fishing in the world. I would particularly highlight the effects in the Pacific Islands. Other than Western Africa, the Pacific Islands probably suffer from the second largest amount of IUU fishing in the world as a percentage of their total catch. They are also as, if not more, reliant on the revenues from fishing, both their own and the sale of fishing rights to other states, like the US, who do follow the rules through things like the South Pacific Tuna Treaty, as anywhere on Earth. And so when you have a Chinese fleet, the largest in the Pacific, also engaged in the largest amount of IUU, it denies these states the revenues they need, it undermines their governance, it takes away livelihoods and fish protein from their communities, it opens them up to all kinds of illegality, also opens them up to potential elite capture and influence operations as China engages in checkbook diplomacy across the region. This is not a distant concern for the United States. We are a Pacific power resident in the region, be it the state of Hawaii or the territories of Guam, the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, and American Samoa. We have millions of Americans who live in the Pacific. Most of our exclusive economic zone is in the Pacific. We also have our unique legal and moral obligations to defend the three freely associated states of Palau, the freely associated states of, Federal States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. In the Pacific, we have seen a now years-long effort by Beijing to increase its role as a blue water navy and global power by seeking access, military, law enforcement, and dual-use access across the Pacific Islands. That's been most successful in the case of the Solomon Islands, where we saw China sign a landmark security agreement that now allows both Chinese law enforcement but also potentially Chinese Navy vessels to access the Solomons in ways that are not clear. China has also sought similar access in places like Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Vanuatu, and even Kiribati, the closest Pacific Island state to Hawaii. Those have been less successful, but China will not stop trying. And the more that China, or China's illegal fishing fleet, whether intentional or not, deprives these small island states of their number one or number two source of revenue in most cases, undermining their governance, it opens these states up more and more to Chinese economic coercion. It reduces their options, reduces their resilience, makes elite capture of their business people, their thought leaders, and even their government officials far more likely, and therefore increases the long-term challenge of the US, who, in cooperation with our allies, Australia, New Zealand, France, have been the undisputed resident power in the Pacific since World War II of this newcomer that threatens our national security. I would highlight three areas that we have significant resources to confront this. A great deal has already been said about the Coast Guard. The US has been the top partner for the Pacific Islands recently, along with Australia, in patrol, interdiction, and domain awareness capabilities. We have shipwrighter agreements for the Coast Guard with almost every state in the region. We have the Navy doing the same through the Ocean and Maritime Security Initiative. But these are vast waters. And the number one need of the Pacific Islands is better maritime domain awareness. That will not be accomplished using just crewed vessels on the water. It's too much space to cover, and it's too expensive. They need more low Earth orbit, and they need more uncrewed platforms, particularly through things like the Quad's Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness, which has been very slow to roll out in the Pacific. Second, we have the diplomatic and legal angle. China just a month and a half ago finally acceded to the Port State Measures Agreement. I don't think anybody actually believes that China is going to enforce the rules of the PSMA, particularly for Chinese flagged vessels who are bringing illegal catch back to China. But it gives the US a great tool to name and shame Beijing and try to hold its feet to the fire internationally. And finally, we need to exercise the market power. The US has one of the largest seafood consumer markets in the world, particularly for imports, and American consumers would much rather eat sustainably and legally caught seafood, but they need to be empowered to know the difference. And as a native Baltimorean ranking member, I greatly appreciate you pointing out that even in our region, it is almost impossible to know where our seafood comes from. Thank you.
Great, excellent testimony. Mr. Poling, I really appreciate it. Mr. Rickard, please.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Thank you for inviting me to participate in this hearing. I am Nathaniel Rickard, co-managing partner of the law firm of Picard, Kentz, Rowe, and I have worked on international trade issues with the U.S. commercial fishing industry for over 20 years. 4 years ago, the U.S. International Trade Commission investigated the economic impact of IUU seafood on U.S. commercial fisheries, estimating that roughly 11% of the value of all seafood imported into the United States was IUU seafood. In light of their significance, the agency concluded that the elimination of IUU imports, quote, would have a positive effect on U.S. commercial fishers, with estimated increases in U.S. prices, landings, and operating income for all species. The ITC estimated that prohibiting IUU imports would increase the fishing industry's operating income by nearly $61 million annually, benefiting a broad range of segments. The shrimp industry, largely operating in the Gulf and South Atlantic, would see a $13 million a year boost. The salmon industry on the West Coast and in Alaska would see income grow by $12 million a year. Blue crab watermen in the Mid-Atlantic and Gulf would receive another $6 million a year, while lobstermen in the Northeast would see a $4 million annual increase. Our commercial fishermen need all the help they can get. On Sunday, to commemorate World Oceans Day, the USTR observed that over 90% of the seafood Americans consume comes from overseas. The USTR also explained that, quote, tens of billions of dollars are estimated to be lost annually from IUU fishing, with U.S. industry bearing a significant portion of that loss, unquote. This has resulted in the deterioration of America's maritime industry, while those in other countries, particularly China, have massively expanded. Applying the ITC's estimate to current circumstances, we would have imported roughly $2.7 billion worth of IUU seafood last year. That is over half the total value of all U.S. commercial seafood landings. This level of imports has devastated some of our commercial fishing sectors. The Gulf and South Atlantic shrimp industry, for example, saw the value of its harvest cut in half between 2021 and 2023, losing over $250 million in value on close to the same catch volume. And it's not just coastal communities. American catfish growers experienced a 21% reduction in their sales value last year, losing nearly $100 million in revenue. As with coastal fishermen, catfish farmers in Arkansas are being driven out of business by illegal seafood imports. And it's not just U.S. seafood producers. Americans should be eating more fish. The per-pound value of U.S. commercial landings and U.S. seafood imports have both declined significantly over the past few years. But the volume of domestic landings and imports have also fallen. This means that in a time characterized by significant inflation, the cost of seafood is going the other way, and yet Americans are consuming less seafood. It is reasonable to conclude that Americans' demand for seafood has been harmed by consumer concerns as to how fish in our market has gotten from hook or net to plate. Although Americans can comfortably assume that if they purchase U.S. wild-caught or farm-raised seafood, it has been produced in an ethical and sustainable manner, what can any consumer really know about fish harvested by a foreign distant water fishing fleet? Foreign seafood supply chains are opaque and non-transparent. In my private practice, we work to stop trading networks through which Chinese farm-raised shrimp was transshipped, given a false designation of origin, and then imported into the United States. Over time, we documented how seafood products associated with increased risk, such as chum salmon or Alaska pollock, would be run through supply chains designed to limit disruption in the event that any Trojan horse exporter or paper importer fell under scrutiny. Still today, a quick review of shipment information confirms the continued operation of these networks, facilitating the large volume of IUU seafood believed to be in our market. There are things that can and should be done. For example, the Fish Act of 2025 would meaningfully improve the market position of our domestic seafood producers. It would effectively counter abhorrent practices in foreign fisheries, and it would restore American consumer confidence in the seafood sold in our market. The Fish Act does so by prohibiting the importation of any seafood caught, processed, or transported by foreign vessels on the IUU vessel list, and by requiring that CBP develop a strategy to identify imports of seafood harvested using forced labor. In furtherance to the latter objective, the Fish Act appropriately recognizes the central importance of data collection, data sharing, and data analysis to ensure that IUU seafood is kept out of the U.S. market. President Trump's April executive order on seafood competitiveness reinforced the vital nature of the domestic seafood producers to the American economy, declaring that, quote, the United States should be the world's dominant seafood leader, unquote, and, quote, the erosion of American seafood competitiveness at the hands of unfair foreign trade practices must end, unquote. I believe that the Fish Act advances those twin goals and appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of this legislation. Thanks. I look forward to any questions you have.
Great. Thank you very much for that testimony. Mr. Prout?
Chairman Sullivan, Ranking Member Blunt-Rochester, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss the devastating impact of IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated crab fishing, and unfair Russian and Chinese trade practices on American crab fishermen and coastal communities. I'd like to first start by acknowledging and thanking Senator Sullivan as well as Senator Cantwell for their longstanding support of independent crab harvesters like myself. Thank you. My name is Gabriel Prout, and I am the president of Alaska Bering Sea Crabbers. I represent the majority of quota and vessel owners harvesting king, snow, and barrett-eye crab in the Bering Sea. I'm also a third-generation commercial fisherman and a vessel owner from Kodiak, Alaska, a seafood powerhouse where hundreds of millions of pounds of product cross the docks each year. For nearly 20 years, I've worked in the Bering Sea and Gulf of Alaska with two of my brothers, continuing a livelihood passed down from our father and grandfather. In recent years, the collapse of the snow crab and red king crab stocks hit us hard. Boats sat tied up, crews were out of work, and families like mine faced deep uncertainty. This fishery isn't just our livelihood, it is our identity. Crab stocks now appear to be rebounding, but we still need action to protect small fishing families like mine, especially from the harms of IUU fishing. For over 20 years, Russian IUU crab has undercut the economic foundation of our industry. In 2021, U.S. International Trade Commission report found that in 2019, over 20% of U.S. imports of snow and king crab from the Russian Far East came from IUU sources. Fortunately, U.S. imports of Russian crab have largely ceased, thanks to the embargo that began under President Biden, continued under President Trump, and was strengthened by Senator Sullivan's work to close the China transshipment loophole. Still, Russia's IUU crab continues entering global markets through other channels, suppressing prices and creating unfair competition for U.S. harvesters who follow the law. Russia's actions extend far beyond IUU. The following are just a few key points. It has heavily subsidized its seafood industry to deliberately undercut U.S. competitors, flooded international markets with underpriced seafood following its 2022 invasion of Ukraine to help fund its war, and contributed to an estimated $1.8 billion in losses for the Alaska seafood industry during 2022 and 2023. There are also national security concerns. Russian crab is being funneled into the global market through North Korean smuggling networks where it's reprocessed and relabeled in China. This collaboration between two sanctioned regimes undermines trade restrictions and raises serious concerns about enforcement and the global seafood supply chain integrity. Based on years of experience witnessing the impact of Russian IUU on Alaskan crabbers, I respectfully urge the following actions. 1, expand the seafood import monitoring program and ensure it focuses on species at highest risk for IUU fishing. Mandate country of origin labeling, also known as cool labeling, that also applies to cooked crab products. 2, expand economic sanctions and trade restrictions, which would extend and strengthen sanctions on Russian origin seafood and ensure enforcement on the ban of Russian seafood entering through third countries, especially China. Expand intelligence sharing agreements with allies. This is under point 3, increase international cooperation and enforcement. Increase support for international bodies working to combat IUU fishing, and push for stronger enforcement of port state measure agreements, especially with countries still importing Russian crab around the world. 4, provide economic relief to affected communities. Establish emergency relief similar to the Seafood Trade Relief Program, and create low-interest loans to help crabbers and fishing fleets modernize gear and remain competitive throughout the world. Prioritize support for small, independent, family-owned fishing operations like those that I represent. And 5, strengthen U.S. enforcement against IUU fishing. Congress should pass Senate Bill 688, the Fish Act, and provide full funding and direction for the U.S. Coast Guard and NOAA to expand patrols, inspections, and enforcements targeting IUU threats. For over 2 decades, Russian IUU crab has undermined American fishermen who follow the rules, invest in sustainability, and support our coastal communities. This isn't just about statistics, it's about lost livelihoods, struggling towns, and an industry fighting for survival. Congress has the opportunity to protect American harvesters and ensure global seafood is harvested legally and sustainably. Thank you for your attention to this critical issue affecting thousands of American fishing families, and I look forward to your questions and working with the committee on effective solutions. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mr. Prout. Great testimony, great recommendations. And, you know, for the audience here, these are some of the tough, great Alaska fishermen. Some of you have seen the show Deadliest Catch. It's a dangerous business, and they bring in some of the best seafood, wild seafood in the world, and shouldn't have to compete against this kind of IUU activity. So, Dr. Saumweber, you'll wrap it up, and then we'll go to questions. I think you need to turn your mic on.
Thank you. Chairman Sullivan, Ranking Member Blunt Rochester, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. It's an honor to be here, and I commend you for focusing on the urgent, important, and evolving challenge of IUU fishing. My name is Whitley Saumweber, and I am a professor of marine affairs at the University of Rhode Island and the director of the Stephenson Ocean Security Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where we examine the intersection of ocean health and global security. I would be remiss if I did not highlight our Ocean Security and Human Rights Forum that we held just last week in partnership with the U.S. IUU and Labor Rights Coalition, and which addressed many of the topics we are discussing here today. I also note, as Greg Poling did, that my comments at this hearing are my own and should not be attributed to either CSIS or to the University of Rhode Island. I've been working on U.S. ocean governance and security policy for more than 2 decades, and during this time, I have seen illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing evolve from an important but secondary resource management issue to one of the foremost and most complex ocean security challenges we face today. It is important because of its centrality to questions of national wealth, sovereignty, and market stability in regions of the globe already beset by conflict and to jobs and communities here at home in the U.S. It is complex because of how the scale and nature of the challenge changes depending on the region and markets being considered. Effective policy solutions are therefore also complex, but if successful, can support U.S. jobs, markets, and national security while offering roadmaps for dealing with issues of global ocean governance and security that extend beyond just seafood. For these reasons, IUU fishing is a prime example of a suite of emerging 21st century ocean security challenges that threaten norms of maritime governance and commerce, but which exist outside the bounds of more traditional security concerns. Characteristics of these new ocean security threats include a link to competition for marine resources, use in gray zone conflict, involvement in illicit and alternative trade economies, a multiplier effect with climate impacts on marine ecosystems, and impacts on human rights at sea. IUU fishing has each of these characteristics, and I hope we get to discuss some of those in more detail later in the hearing. So how do we address this complex challenge? Successful strategies generally fall into one of 4 categories that should work in concert with each other: market access control, operational interdiction, presence, and resource and governance. The U.S. is the largest single importer of seafood in the world, and together with the EU and Japan, we control 60% of the total global market in seafood. This means that comparable market access control policies across these 3 traditional partners have the potential to reshape global supply chains in deep and meaningful ways. To be effective, such programs must include a strong supply chain transparency mechanism, a risk assessment program based on that information, a validation program, and, crucially, strategic enforcement cascades that allow for scalable and targeted penalties. Here in the U.S., NOAA's Seafood Import Monitoring Program meets some of these criteria, but not all. NOAA conducted a year-long review of the program in 2024 and released an action plan last November that had significant support from both industry and civil society groups. Implementation of the action plan would greatly advance the ability of SIMP to meet the requirements I have described. Market access control is the counter-IUU tool with the greatest potential global reach, but operational interdiction of IUU activity remains important for deterrence. The U.S. can support operational interdiction through direct action by expanding shipwright agreements with partner nations, and we can provide direct support for maritime domain awareness in critical areas through both material assistance and capacity building. One example of such an arrangement is the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness, already mentioned by Greg Polling, between the Quad, that is US, India, Japan, and Australia, and our Indo-Pacific partners. This agreement is a prime example of the kind of partnership and soft power security guarantee that the US alone can offer to much of the world, and which on our best days is one of the key reasons US leadership has been indispensable for the past 80 years. We provide help and support to those who need it and are prepared to support our partners in their own efforts to claim sovereign identity and rights. These are things we can offer which our competitors, notably China and Russia, cannot. And it is why such partnerships have provided a bulwark in the continuing effort to support the growth of democracy worldwide. To make this approach work, however, the US must be present in international fora and development work in order to provide that alternative. In these efforts, 3 agencies in particular are crucial: the US Coast Guard, NOAA, and USAID. Each of these play irreplaceable roles in the soft power competition that is the foundation of counter-IUU fishing work. The dismantling of USAID has already caused widespread harm to ongoing efforts, and the threats to NOAA are deeply concerning. Just as the US government needs a positive presence with partners abroad, it also needs capacity at home. We are now entering the final year of the first national strategy from the Interagency Working Group for Combating IUU Fishing, and there is tremendous opportunity to build on initial efforts. With strong support for its member agencies, the working group could form the foundation of coordinated enforcement action. Conversely, significant budget cuts to any of the key agencies will cripple counter-IUU programs. Cuts to NOAA in particular will fatally harm the ability to coordinate, conduct supporting science, and be present in critical negotiations and partnerships abroad. Every US administration since George W. Bush has established or endorsed national strategies to combat IUU fishing. Similarly, every Congress over that time has supported bipartisan legislation attempting to grapple with the issue, of which Senator Sullivan, your Fish Act is a fine example. I hope that this discussion today will help all of us to take advantage of that momentum and work towards these solutions. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Great, excellent opening statements by all 4, actually 5 of our witnesses. Senator Whitehouse is at another hearing, so thank you on that. Let me begin with the basic question of this idea of whole of government approach. One of the things that I've been trying to do in my capacity, but I think we can do a better job of it. And Dr. Saumweber, your point about Japan, EU, and the United States, 60% of all imports in the world, that is huge power. So after we finally got the US government to ban the importation of Russian seafood, it took a long time, and then ban as Mr. Prout talked about, the kind of laundering of Russian seafood through China. They tried to cheat. The communist dictatorships are all working together to cheat, as they typically do. I've been trying to get other countries, our allies, EU, Canada, Japan in particular, to do something similar. The Canadians, to their credit, have done a lot of banning of Russian seafood imports, but I'd like to get all of your opinions very quickly on just what you think some of the key things we could do with like-minded partners and allies to enhance international cooperation, which I think is really the key. It's kind of come out in all your testimony. And importantly, also get the word out, the naming and shaming that Mr. Polling talked about. You know, China likes to, pretend that it's a country that sticks up for developing countries in Africa, the Pacific Islands. And as your testimony showed, Ms. Polling, it's very much to the contrary. Their activities are completely undermining the sovereignty, independence, economic capacity of these countries that China claims that it tries to favor. We need to get the word out on that much better. So can I get any and all of your views on the need for deeper international cooperation and what specific recommendations you would make for us or the Trump administration to do that? And I'll just take any and all of you guys to weigh in on that question. Go ahead, Dr. Saumweber.
Sure, I'll start. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I absolutely, as I pointed out in my testimony and you noted, we have these strong traditional partners in the EU and Japan, and we are together this huge block of the seafood market. That market power is
huge.
It's tremendous, and it's really true that market access control offers the most far-reaching tool for controlling this problem, for getting at this problem. If we can work with those partners to set common standards, we can set the tenor for the market. We can set the direction that it goes. So it's really going to require us to work closely with the European Union.
And in your experience, do the Europeans and the Japanese want to do this? I was a little disappointed. I tried to get when the Biden administration was putting in a strong fish statement in the G8 summit agreement with the G8 leaders. My office actually drafted that statement, sent it to the Biden team. To their credit, they used it. The Japanese, who are good friends, good allies, they thwarted it. So if you're from Japan and you're watching this, you know, again, I'm a strong supporter of the alliance. I think the Japanese are great on so many issues. On this issue, they were weak, and they need to step up and be stronger. I think the people from the Japanese embassy are watching this hearing.
I think Japan cares a great deal about IUU fishing. I think
Do they? Okay,
yeah, they do. For their perspective, they have a very serious problem with the Chinese in particular coming into their waters, and North Korea as well. And so I think they're very concerned about it from a sovereignty standpoint, from illegal presence of fishing.
Because it hurts their
vessels in
fishermen
waters.
too, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a very, very strong concern with it. The sort of particulars of it are a little bit different than here in the United States, but they do have a market access control program, as does the EU. The EU is in some ways further along than we are, and they take a slightly different approach in how they implement it, but they do have a program, as do we. And if we can align standards, that would be hugely powerful.
Yeah,
the Japanese are just kind of at the start of getting it going, so we need to support them and to help them.
So you think that would be a really important kind of outcome of this hearing, to work on that?
Absolutely.
Good. Any other thoughts on that, Mr. Pauling?
I would make 2 points. First, I think we could do a far better job collaborating with our most technologically advanced partners when it comes to supporting maritime domain awareness.
Yeah.
We are vanishingly close to a point in time when it will be all but impossible for a vessel that has a metal superstructure that's, say, 5 meters or longer to run dark anywhere in the world. We know what the technology looks like to accomplish that. Combinations of low Earth orbit satellites collecting synthetic aperture radar, radio frequency detection, et cetera. But most of that capability is in the private sector, and it's not all American. You know, on synthetic aperture radar, we've got maybe 2 of the top 4 companies trying to develop low Earth orbit constellations. The others are in Japan and Europe. When it comes to radio frequency...
But still our allies, though.
Our allies, but for a number of reasons, mostly around security sector assistance, our platforms that we provide to allies and partners only incorporate American technology. To give one example, in the case of the Philippines, who's up against the most coercion from China's maritime militia, they've all but abandoned using preferred U.S. platforms in favor of Canada's platform now, the Dark Vessel Detection, or DVD system, because that can incorporate not just Canadian, but also American and European technology, whereas the American platforms only incorporate American companies. We need to understand that, yeah, of course, there's creative competition here among tech companies, but this is a global problem. And we should not turn partners away from whether it's Japanese, European, Israeli, Korean alternatives that can do a good job. That we should be able to light up the entire ocean in the next 5 to 10 years, but we won't do it with just American tech.
Good.
The second point I would make is, on the legal front, yes, we are parties and champions of port state measures, of the Fish Stocks Act. We are still not a party to UNCLOS, and that gives China a free point in every debate, in every international platform.
Okay, good. Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to put a fine point on a comment that was said at the very end of your testimony, Dr. Saumweber, where you said this used to be a secondary issue. I was just writing down different words from jobs in the economy in our small businesses and mid-sized businesses that are impacted, our environment, as Senator Whitehouse mentioned, criminal activities, trade. I wrote down technology. I wrote down health, because we haven't really talked about the health impact of this, but when we're dealing with illegal products, we don't know what's in some of these things. So even our health status, national security. We talked about Russia and China and just the impact that they have not only on our national security, but also on their influence in other places around the world. And markets, our market power, piracy, international trade, technology. To me, this is a front and center issue. And so I want to start off with my first comment to say I'm excited to join the Fish Act. That's number one.
Hey, that's progress.
There you go. And and secondly, Dr. Saumweber, I wanted to ask your opinion. We know that NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, plays a vital role in combating IUU fishing. From your experience, can you talk about what the operational impact of a 30% budget cut to NOAA's enforcement activities? And can you describe how these cuts would affect NOAA's ability to conduct investigations into seafood fraud and mislabeling, which was another thing that we mentioned, issues that directly impact not only consumers, but domestic fisheries?
Yes, thank you for that question. A 30% cut in NOAA's budget would be devastating to these efforts on a number of fronts. First of all, among the first things to go with any budget cut, even a much smaller cut than 30%, is the kind of interagency coordination that is hard, difficult, requires time, but is sometimes seen as being outside of kind of the core day-to-day mission of good federal workers. And so they don't dedicate time to those kinds of things that are complicated but necessary to attack this kind of really difficult challenge. And so right out the window, you'd sort of lose that coordination capacity that's so fundamental to this effort. Next, you're going to lose the ability to have supporting science, to have the necessary kind of research done, to understand how these stocks are changing, to understand what critical limits may or may not be being passed, and to be thinking about how this is really impacting our fishermen here at home. And then finally, and I think as important in any of those situations, is the ability, as I mentioned, to be present, to be part of these international negotiations, to be at the regional fishery management organizations where we're negotiating with China, where we're negotiating with our competitors, where we need to be educated and speak in a way that is informed about the state of affairs in the world and about the nature of fish stocks and the health of the ocean. And with those cuts, it fundamentally damage the ability to do that.
Thank you. Dr. or Mr. Prout, in addition to the travel, I would also say you have the best lapel pin of everyone as well with that beautiful crab. Mr. Prout, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you highlighting IUU fishing as a national security threat, and I share that view. I'd like to focus on a particularly urgent issue raised in your testimony, and that's the use of North Korean smuggling networks to launder Russian crab into the global seafood supply chain. From your vantage point in the commercial seafood sector, how visible or traceable is this laundering activity, and what makes it hard to detect?
Thank you, Senator Blunt-Rochester. It's incredibly hard to detect because eventually it just lands as the name of another country. So there is no commitment to actually saying where it originally comes from, as Cool would help with. So once it goes through there and goes through those channels to get modified and then placed as a different country of origin, you essentially lose the original traceability. And then, of course, that's easier imported to these other countries around the world and possibly even back into the U.S. domestic market so that U.S. consumers are unaware of where the true source of their seafood and what they're supporting is actually coming from. So it's incredibly difficult to really truly trace that. We know what's happening, but after it takes effect, it's hard to continue to follow it.
And what are the risks to U.S. fishermen, processors, consumers, if seafood from sanctioned regimes continue to enter the market undetected?
Undetected, it's one of the key components of it is the downward pressure it puts on prices for true fishermen who are held to a higher standard of safety, of responsibility and sustainability for their fisheries. So really it's the downward pressure that's putting on local fishermen. It's, when those products enter the market, it puts a tremendous amount of that downward pressure on prices for U.S. fishermen.
Mr. Chairman, I had more questions that I'll submit for the record, but could I ask one last
Sure,
question?
sure. I'm going to do another round.
Oh, okay.
Or two,
Okay.
or three.
Okay.
This is very important. I think Senator Cantwell might be on her way, but we'll keep asking questions.
Perfect. Mr. Prout, you also described Russian fishing vessels exhibiting behavior that suggests they may be engaged in intelligence gathering near critical infrastructure. I think this is one of the biggest issues that we talk a lot about on this committee as well, is critical infrastructure around the world and just any kind of surveillance, vulnerabilities. How concerned are you that commercial fishing vessels could be used as cover for surveillance or sabotage, particularly in the U.S. waters or near allied infrastructure?
Thank you, Senator Blunt-Rochester, for the question. It's definitely of concern because we know what's happening with the monitoring that we have in place. These Russian vessels or Chinese vessels that are labeled as foreign fishing vessels are not exhibiting behavior, maneuvering that is typically associated with fishing behavior. They're stationing at certain areas around the country, typically, as you mentioned, to gather reconnaissance and possibly even sabotage for future operations. So it's definitely a major concern that they kind of use these fishing labels or fishing operations as a covert method for their sabotage and intel gathering capabilities and goals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great.
I'll yield back.
All right, it's great to have the ranking member here. Are you ready, Senator Cantwell? Or I'll turn it over to Senator Cantwell for some questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to my colleague for also your great work on the subcommittee. And thank you, Senator Sullivan, just for the important discussion about illegally unreported, unregulated fisheries and how much that causes harm in both Washington and Alaska and across the nation. I'm sure that's pretty much been the subject of this conversation.
The world.
Okay, good.
Alaska, Delaware, Texas, the world.
So illegal fishing counts for up to 1/3 of the world's total fishery. So about 11%, 22 billion in seafood imports were caught illegally. So this really does, China and Russia are two of the worst actors in this space, and Russia in particular poses a direct threat to the livelihood of U.S. fishermen, including in my home state. One study found that 1/3 of fish imported from China was actually Russian fish, and we need to keep up the pressure to stop this illegal Russian seafood from disrupting the markets here in the United States. So in the 2022 defense bill, working with my colleague from Alaska, we included the largest ocean legislative package in decades, including provisions to expand NOAA's seafood traceability programs. And we worked together with the NOAA Corps to expand their fleet of vessels and aircraft so that we can more and better affect stock assessments and better science and support for fishing families to stop the illegal fishing. So the administration, though, is calling for us to be seafood dominant. That's great. They say they care about stopping illegal fishing, and yet they are gutting the core of NOAA programs and staffing. And that could have disastrous effects to our fisheries, management, science, and enforcement. So far, the administration's action have led to 576 employees at the National Marine Fisheries Service being lost. That's an 18% reduction in staff from January and a 36% vacancy rate of normal staffing levels. NOAA told fishery managers not to expect basic survey data that they need to manage fisheries. This is unacceptable. To make it worse, 30% of NOAA's research ships will be tied up at the docks this summer because the administration refusing my question to you, Mr. Saumweber, science is the foundation. How are these current NOAA budget cuts and impacting on not being able to do stock assessments hurting us in our ability to combat illegal fishing?
Thank you, Senator. So budget cuts to NOAA are devastating to our ability to combat IUU fishing. You can't really combat the problem without understanding what's there. The challenge, as you noted, is to have a strong foundation, a strong understanding of what is sustainable, of what is possible to catch. And without that understanding, we have a very limited ability to work to set appropriate boundaries, to work with our partners to combat IUU fishing. NOAA science is the foundation for all of these negotiations that we're doing in the international space with our partners, and it is the foundation for the work that we do here at home to prevent illegal product from coming into the nation.
Thank you for that. Mr. Prout, as a crabber, are you concerned about the NOAA fisheries workforce programs and the cuts and impacts?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member Senator Cantwell. Yeah, absolutely. The NOAA surveys are an essential part of how we run our fisheries. They're essentially the backbone of our fisheries across the U.S. Without them, we don't have the data set for safe and sustainable harvest levels to be set. These surveys guide our quotas, protect the resource, and they give regulators the essential data and confidence to know whether or not they should open or in some cases close a fishery. So if those surveys are underfunded or not funded at all or delayed and they're operating, it causes a tremendous amount of uncertainty for the processors involved, for the fishermen involved, for the communities that rely on those species. Continued investments and funding of those surveys is not just good science, in my opinion. It's also required for economic stability, so you still have these fisheries in a sustainable manner for the future.
Well, again, I apologize to my colleagues and others if I'm repeating something that's been said, but we worked in a bipartisan basin to secure Coast Guard funding and infrastructure investment. We made massive upgrades to the Coast Guard infrastructure in Kodiak, your hometown, I guess, and we authorized new heavy weather boats needed for search and rescue for the fishermen off our coast. And I'm concerned that the Coast Guard has temporarily reassigned ships and aircraft away from those core missions without a concrete plan. So, for example, a C-130 based in Kodiak is now being used to fly, quote, alien expulsion missions, end quote, on behalf of ICE. We need them to do the search and rescue and to deter illegal fishing in the Bering Sea. So, you highlighted in your written statement that we should fund Coast Guard to increase to combat illegal fishing. How important is this presence in Kodiak for crabbers?
Thank you, Ranking Member Cantwell. It's tremendously important when you start losing necessary infrastructure and pieces of equipment that are dedicated for those search and rescue efforts, the IUU efforts to deter IUU. And they start being allocated to different areas and then when they were originally intended. It makes it extremely difficult for fishermen to make safe and sound decisions when you know there's going to be less assets available for one of the most primary functions, which is search and rescue and protection of the fleet. So it's very, very critical that we maintain those pieces of infrastructure for the local fishing communities throughout Alaska and the U.S.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just, Mr. Saumweber, for the record, talked about surveys, but I think you probably believe the fishing patrols are also important. The fishing patrols are also important.
Yes, of course.
To the Management Council.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. And look, on stock assessments, I am adamant that we need to do it. To be honest, the Biden administration was a fail on it. We did not focus nearly enough on stock assessments. You may recall I had the Deputy Secretary of Commerce here for his confirmation hearing just a couple weeks ago with the Trump administration, and I kind of read him the riot act on stock assessments, so it's a bipartisan abuse.
I don't remember that.
Oh, I think you remember that.
I do.
More importantly, he remembers
I'm
that.
joking. I'm joking.
But, I agree, and as I mentioned earlier, if we get to the budget reconciliation bill, would love your guys' vote on it. Maybe that's not going to happen, but one thing that will happen is a massive, historic investment in the Coast Guard, which is going to be probably, as I mentioned in my opening statement, but the biggest investment in the Coast Guard in U.S. history. $22 billion has never been seen, anything like that. And it's all going to go into cutters and icebreakers and helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft and shoreside infrastructure and Kodiak and Juneau and Seattle. So there's going to be a lot.
I so appreciate your leadership on this issue and your forthright education of people who didn't quite understand how critical stock assessments were to our fisheries and to being able to manage and police. But I do hope that in these resource allocations that we will make these points about the resources being shifted and how this is why I believe in a NOAA Organic Act, because I'm tired of people coming in every 2 years and giving us a different statement. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So let me ask, for the committee, we've had a mention of one bill, Mr. Prout mentioned it. It was actually a bill that I got into a committee markup of a bigger bill here. It was dealing with the cool labeling that you mentioned, Mr. Prout. And then I also had in last year's NDAA a provision saying no Chinese fish in any of our military commissaries, PXs, chow halls. I mean, you think the Chinese Communist Party, PLA, is serving Alaskan crab in their Chinese military mess halls? They're not, okay? So that bill was unfortunately stripped out of the NDAA last year by the then Speaker of the House. I have no idea why he was kind of pro-China, but can I just get the committee's view very quickly, because I want to turn to some other issues on those two bills. Mr. Prout, I'm assuming the Cool Act cooked crab labeling legislation that I got in, that was actually the Chips and Science bill a couple of years ago. You and others are still very supportive of. You mentioned it in your opening testimony. And then I had a provision in the NDAA last year that passes very bipartisan in the markup of the Armed Services Committee. No Chinese fish in any U.S. military PX, commissary, chow hall. I mean, come on. Why on earth would the U.S. military buy IUU fish from China when it can buy great Alaskan crab? So can I get just your views on that? This will be important as I press to get this legislation passed again this year. Mr. Pauling, you have a view on either of those?
Well, on the second.
No Chinese communist fish in commissaries and on U.S. military bases?
I won't speak to whether the fish are communist, but I do think it sends an important signal of the U.S.'s commitment to only import sustainably caught and legally caught fish.
Good. Mr. Pickens?
I think the country of origin labeling laws have been massively important for domestic fisheries, and being able for consumers to be able to make choices at retail with more information is always better.
Great. Mr. Prout?
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Yeah, country of origin labeling is extremely important, especially when it comes to not only frozen live crab products, but frozen cooked crab products.
By the way, can you, because I tried to explain this to all my colleagues here. It took a while. You can do it probably in much better time. Why is the cooked issue important as well?
It's one of the methods used to circumvent that. There's just different labeling enforcement for cooked products versus raw products that come into the state, and ensuring that we have country of origin labeling that also applies to the cooked product of the crab would help immensely in getting that applied the right way and letting people know what's actually going on for that country of origin. And then as far as the Chinese fish and the food served, we want Alaskan freedom fish is what we want.
We want freedom fish to our service members, not commie fish to our service members. Mr. Saumweber, you agree with those bills? Because I'm going to reattack them and hopefully get these over the goal line.
Thank you. I absolutely believe that country of origin labeling is a great idea. And Also absolutely believe that the U.S. government should be using its purchasing power in whatever way it can to support sustainability and traceability in our supply chains.
I mean, the idea that that our military is buying Chinese fish to serving to soldiers and Marines and sailors is just dumb, right? And I have no idea why the Speaker of the House last year stripped my bill out of the NDAA, but we'll reattack that. Mr. Prout, let me go back to you on the Russian fishing industry and unfair competition with regard to U.S. fishermen, particularly in the crab area. You know, I've stated it publicly, I don't have it in front of me, but there was a senior Russian official who publicly declared, "We know we're at war with American fishermen," right? Just said it, right? And their government is giving them resources, subsidies for their fleet. How did the banning of the importation of Russian seafood into U.S. markets help our crabbers, but help the U.S. industry, all of our fishing communities, whether in Texas or Delaware or in Alaska, help? And did that help your ability then to sell to the biggest market in the world, which is our market? And what more should we be doing, both with regard to the unfair competition with China and Russian fleets? We've talked about their IUU practices, their slave labor practices. Another thing that happens is their governments heavily subsidize their fleet. We don't do that hardly at all here. So what are the other things we can be doing, and how has the ban on Russian seafood into the U.S. market, including the Chinese communist loophole that we also shut down, helped your industry and other fishermen throughout the country?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Sullivan. So the effect of IUU and the importation of it into our markets has been nothing short of devastating. When Russia had originally, when they flood the market with illegal, underpriced crab or any other seafood commodity for that matter, it puts downward pressure on our prices and destabilizes the processors. So processors within Alaska especially rely on numerous revenue sources of different seafood commodities from multiple
That's particularly
species.
the case in Kodiak, right?
Correct, yes, absolutely. Hundreds of millions of pounds of different products coming across the dock. And they use that method to stay afloat, kind of diversifying their portfolio a little bit. But if they take a major loss on crab or salmon, it really destabilizes their efforts and it threatens their whole operation. And additionally, fishermen then are potentially looking at a loss of a place to deliver because the processor is unable to compete with the importation of IUU products just due to the price difference that is associated with it. And as far as the difference...
It's hard to compete against slave labor.
It is. I mean, I'll just go ahead and say I do work for my father, though, so it's they have a little bit associated with that. But also, the program...
We might have to strike that law. If your dad is watching, we apologize.
So, but as far as the impact of your efforts, it's had a tremendous impact of banning the importation of Russian crab. One of the most notable products in Alaska, of course, is the Alaskan red king crab. And this past season, myself and family and all the rest of the fishermen who participated in that experienced record prices at the dock for their catch. And I can confidently say that I believe that wouldn't have taken effect had there still been a large importation of Russian product coming into the domestic market. So your efforts to stem the flow of that IUU has been very obvious to my family and many of the fishermen within Alaska.
And in terms of government policies that we can undertake to combat IUU fishing, the heavily subsidized fleet, the one thing I want to talk about briefly, and I'll save it for the next round because I want to be respectful to my colleague here. Well, I'll just mention it. And I'm going to really compliment some of these reporters. This is Ian Urbina, who wrote this incredible New Yorker piece, "The Crimes Behind the Seafood You Eat." And it was all about Chinese IUU. It's really detailed investigative reporting. I'd like to submit that for the record for this hearing. without objection. There was another really good piece in Politico magazine. Ian Urbina has just done a great job in terms of highlighting this. But my point is, to Senator Blunt Rochester's point earlier, this is such a unifying issue for America. It should be. These guys are using forced labor. They're using unsustainable environmental practices. They're crushing our seafood coastal communities. They're undermining our allies. They're ruining the fish stocks of the world. And they're often using human trafficking. And then, I mean, you mentioned it, Mr. Prout, the North Koreans are laundering their seafood. They're using their money for terrorism. I mean, it sounds like the plot of a bad James Bond movie, right? I mean, this should be unifying. We should be making the whole world know about this. I mean, and it really doesn't get out there. I don't think there's any American that thinks this is a good idea, that we're importing Chinese slave labor fish that's putting hardworking American fishermen and their families out of business. So maybe I'll just mention it for the whole panel. What more can we be doing to let the world know? This New Yorker piece came out on October 9th, 2023, which is incredible. I think the whole country should read this. You'd be shocked at what you guys in Alaska, what our fishermen have to compete against. You can't compete against slave labor and unsustainable fisheries and cheating, which is what the Chinese communists do all over the world. So what more can we be doing, either to name and shame, as you said, Mr. Poling, or any other things that our government can be doing in coordination with others to get the word out? Mr. Prout, you want to take that on first?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator Sullivan. At the end of the day, I think it's just, it comes down to it's hard to compete when you play by the rules and your competitor doesn't, especially at a global scale. So I think we need help modernizing. It's plain and simple, modernizing the fleets of America. The majority of our crab fleet in Alaska is outdated and inefficient. Maintenance costs are extremely high to try and stay up on safety and any issues that come up from just having old vessels. I think the average age of the Bering Sea crab fleet is over 50 years old at this point. Anything that can be done to help mitigate those issues is extremely important. At the same time, looking at new crab builds, average crab build right now is between $10 and $15 million. That's an extremely difficult hurdle to overcome when you're looking at trying to modernize a vessel or modernize your fleet. So I think Congress could definitely step up and help with modernization loans, vessel recapitalization programs, as well as grants and disaster relief to help fishermen who are still in difficult situations just from the fallout of IUU fishing and the effect it's had on our domestic markets as of recently.
Good, great answer. Mr. Pickard.
I just want to emphasize the importance of this market to global seafood supply chains around the world and how incredible a tool is available by leveraging market access to change behavior overseas and to draw attention to these problems. And so, I found Mr. Prout's testimony about the actions taken on IU Russian seafood to be fascinating because you can see the impact overall of the market and how much that has changed things. As you know, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, under its current enforcement, has made seafood a priority sector. Because the Chinese seafood processing industry can take in anything, the actual denial of access to this market is how I think you draw attention to it. And unfortunately, the federal government has not done very much of that. In very isolated incidents where we have said, in order to ship to the U.S., you have to meet these certain requirements. I think they've all been effective, but they have been so limited in their application that we're not using that tool effectively.
I mean, we've banned Russian seafood, right? Should we ban the importation of Chinese seafood?
Just for me, I think that is an appropriate response overall to what is a huge challenge internationally. Yeah.
Other answers to that, and then do you have any more questions?
I'll just say quickly here, I think that there's two levels to operate on. On the first, as you well know, Senator, a big part of leadership is showing up. And this year we've had the 10th International Ocean Conference hosted by the government of South Korea. This week is the 3rd UN Ocean Conference. This fall, December, will be the G20 meeting in South Africa. All three of these are major international conferences focused on oceans and at which IUU is a major agenda item. And the U.S. has not sent a delegation to either of the ones currently or previously happening, and I don't believe we'll be sending one to the G20. That's a big problem. The rest of the world sees that. China's stepping in and knows that, and our allies and partners are wondering where we are in those forums and what our priorities are. And then secondly,
That's a great point, by the way. We can make sure we're reaching out to the State Department after this hearing saying, hey, come on, guys, show up. The president's executive order focuses on this stuff, so let's get going.
Thank you. I would also just like to emphasize the points that Mr. Prout and Mr. Rickard made there as well, that market access control is such a crucial part of this. And, we have a market access control program here in the United States that has been, I would say, partially implemented. And the problem with partial implementation is you leave large gaps and loopholes for illegal product to enter the country. You've created essentially half of a regulatory program, and people are smart. Bad guys are smart, and they see where the holes are, they see where the dark places are, and they fit their illegal product in those dark places. So if we want to have an effective market access control program, we need to really think about investing in NOAA and investing in our seafood import monitoring program and expanding it in ways that make sense so we don't have these gaps and loopholes.
By the way, on international agreements, 10 years ago when I first got to the Senate, I worked with a number of members of this committee to pass legislation for the U.S. to join the Port State Measures Agreement that deals with a lot of these issues. China has finally ratified this agreement just recently, but I always like to remind people what we call with the Chinese promise fatigue, which means almost every promise, almost every agreement, almost everything they've ever told us as a country we're going to do, they never do, right? We have promise fatigue with the Chinese. They just don't ever abide by their agreements. Do you think the Chinese are going to shut down their IUU fishing to comply with the Port State Measures Agreement, which they just ratified?
Short answer, no.
Hell no?
I think that the Chinese do what makes sense in the immediate term. And so in other words, they will comply to the extent that it makes sense for them.
Yeah.
And I think that they have seen great success in using their distant water fishing fleet, both as an economic tool for their own purposes, but also as a tool of soft power.
Yep.
And I think that they will continue to do so.
Any other thoughts on final thoughts on what we should be doing to kind of address these, including the big one I really want to, and Mr. Pauling, you mentioned in your testimony, like this idea of naming and shaming. This is a great article, right? These political magazines articles on all this are really, really good, and yet, they just don't seem to be breaking through to the general public.
I would also commend Interbean and his Outlaw Ocean outfit for their fantastic reporting, which among other things led to CBP's recent sanctioning of the Genfa 7, Chinese vessel for human trafficking. One good example here, I think, is to look to how the Europeans have more effectively leveraged their market power than we have when it comes to sanctions on specific countries for fishing violations. Not always perfect, but their yellow card, red card system that they use to threaten and then in some cases ban the import of seafood has had success, not in the case of China or Russia, but after the AP won the Pulitzer in 2012 for their investigations into slavery in the Thai seafood industry, the Europeans gave them a yellow card, the threat that all Thai seafood imports to the European Union would be banned if they didn't get their act together, and the Thais made remarkably quick progress in better monitoring and enforcement. Same is true of the Vietnamese, who have been under a yellow card for years. So I think the U.S. has been slow to recognize that we have the largest import market in the world and an enormous amount of market power if we can adequately leverage it to get other countries to toe the line.
Yeah. No, that's a really important point. Although I will say the Marine Stewardship Council, we have some real issues with them. They seem to be kind of in the pocket of the Russians. They haven't checked on the Russian fleet. They stamp them sustainably all the time, even though they don't inspect them. there's some real issues with those guys. So I agree that we need to do the sustainability certification, but the MSC is failing, and they're, in my view, kind of giving Russia a blank check to do whatever the heck they want, and they don't even go check on the sustainability of that fleet, primarily because the Russians pay them money, in my view. So I got a real problem with those guys, and I think they're actually part of the problem. Mr. Rickard, did you have a final point on policies that we should be focused on?
No, not beyond other things that's been discussed here.
Mr. Chairman, I want to follow up on your point about it breaking through. And I think as a follow-up, it would be good to have some real conversation about these things because it affects all of us. And so the breakthrough is important. I think the global participation demonstrates how serious we are about it. But I really am interested as well in the market access control and what you described as partial implementation. I personally, I'm new to this subcommittee and would love to understand a little bit more about partial implementation versus full implementation and what that really looks like. And then lastly, my other concern was a comment that I think Mr. Rickard made about Americans consuming less. That is concerning. And so figuring out how we balance and give real confidence to people about the industry. And as a seafood lover, this is really important, I think, to so many of us. And so, again, some of those are follow-ups that I'd like to delve a little bit deeper on as well. But thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for the important committee, subcommittee opportunity, and also thank you to all of the witnesses.
Great. Well, listen, this has been a great hearing. I really, really appreciate the panelists. Mr. Prout, thank you again for the award of coming the furthest, for participating.
And nice lapel pin.
And nice lapel pin. We're going to follow up on this a lot. As you see, there's a real bipartisan consensus to do more. I think we need to do a lot more. And we will be relying on experts like all of you in the coming weeks and months as we push forward on a really, really important issue that, as Senator Blunt Rochester just talked about, it encompasses national security, environmental issues, human trafficking, slave labor, the economy of our coastal communities, the viability of our fishermen. I mean, this kind of encompasses a lot of things. And the good news here in the Congress is that it's very bipartisan, in part because it encompasses so many of these important issues. So what we will respectfully ask of the witnesses is the committee record will be open for about another 2 weeks. If there's additional questions that we submit to you, we ask that you try to get them back to the committee promptly. And other than that, at this juncture, this hearing is adjourned, and I want to thank again all the witnesses for their outstanding service today.